Imagine for a moment that beneath the surface of your personality, beyond the habits you've picked up, the choices you've made, and the experiences that shaped you, there lies something deeper, a hidden blueprint, a set of timeless patterns that show up in every culture, every story, and every human life. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, believed that we're all guided by these invisible forces, which he called archetypes. They're not just characters in myths or roles in movies. They're reflections of who we are, who we've been, and who we might become. And here's the fascinating part. Once you begin to recognize these archetypes, it's almost like seeing yourself in a mirror for the very first time. You suddenly realize why you act the way you do, why you feel drawn to certain paths, and why some struggles keep repeating in your life. It's as though life has been handing you a script all along, and only now are you starting to read it. Today we're diving into 7 of these archetypes, 7 timeless characters that may reveal your true self. As we go through them, notice which ones resonate with you, and just as importantly, which ones trigger you, because often the archetypes that make us the most uncomfortable are the ones that hold lessons we've been avoiding. So let's begin with the one you've probably seen play out in every myth, every movie, and maybe even in your own life. The hero. The hero is perhaps the most celebrated archetype of all. Think of the legends you grew up with. Hercules, King Arthur, Mulan, Harry Potter. Every culture tells the story of someone who rises up against impossible odds, who fights for something greater than themselves, and who proves through struggle and sacrifice that they are worthy. But the hero archetype is not just a character in stories. It's a force within us, and when you carry it, you feel it in your bones. Maybe you've always been the one who feels called to rise to the challenge. Maybe when life gets tough, something inside you says, I can't quit. I have to push through. That's the hero speaking. Heroes live for obstacles because obstacles give them a chance to prove their strength. Their lives feel like a quest, a series of battles to conquer, dragons to slay, mountains to climb. And when they succeed, it's not just about personal victory. It's about becoming an example, an inspiration for others. But here's the paradox. While the hero archetype gives you resilience, determination, and the courage to keep going, it also carries a shadow. Jung was very clear about this. Every archetype has its light and its darkness. For the hero, the shadow shows up as arrogance. The hero can become obsessed with proving themselves. They can start to believe that they are only as valuable as their victories. And when that happens, they burn out. They drive themselves into the ground. They fight battles that don't need to be fought just so they can feel alive. Maybe you've felt that pressure, that sense that no matter how much you've achieved, it's never enough. Maybe you've ticked off every box on society's checklist. Good grades, stable career, even admiration from others, and still felt a strange emptiness. That's the hero's shadow whispering. Win more, prove more, do more. And it's exhausting, isn't it? Because no matter how hard you push, there's always another dragon, another mountain, another test. But here's the beauty of recognizing the hero within yourself. Once you see it, you gain the power to step out of its shadow. You begin to understand that your worth doesn't come from endless battles. It comes from the courage you've already shown. Simply by being here alive, surviving the storms life has thrown at you. Sometimes the greatest act of heroism isn't slaying an external enemy. It's laying down the sword, admitting your vulnerability, and daring to rest. Think about it. Some of the most powerful heroes in mythology don't win because they're the strongest. They win because they learn humility, compassion, and self-awareness. Achilles had to confront his pride. Frodo had to accept his weakness. Even modern heroes like Katniss Everdeen aren't defined by their physical power, but by their ability to sacrifice, to love, and to stay human in the face of cruelty. So if you recognize yourself in the hero, ask yourself this: are you fighting battles that matter, or are you fighting battles just to prove that you can? Do you measure your worth by what you've achieved, or by the strength of character you've built along the way? These are not easy questions, but they are the questions that can free you from the endless treadmill of proving and winning. And here's something even more fascinating. The hero doesn't show up in isolation. It's often balanced or challenged by other archetypes. For instance, the caregiver archetype, which we'll get into next, often appears as the hero's counterpart. While the hero thrives on tests of strength, the caregiver thrives on acts of compassion. Where the hero asks, what can I achieve? The caregiver asks, who can I protect? And sometimes the real growth for a hero comes when they stop chasing glory and start embracing care. Because at the end of the day, what use is a hero who saves the world but can't nurture the people within it? The hero teaches us about strength, resilience, and perseverance. But there's another side of human nature that doesn't see glory through victory, but through compassion. Where the hero charges into battle, the caregiver steps quietly into the wounds that are left behind. If the hero asks, "What can I conquer?" the caregiver asks, "Who can I protect?" The caregiver archetype is one of the most universal because we've all felt its presence, either through someone who took care of us, or through the instinct within ourselves to care for others. Think about a nurse working long hours in a hospital, not for recognition but because they genuinely want to ease suffering, or the parent who stays up all night with a sick child, sacrificing their own rest without a second thought, or even the friend who becomes everyone's shoulder to cry on, always putting others' needs before their own. These are the caregivers of the world. Carl Jung described a caregiver as an expression of our instinct to nurture and preserve life. It's the part of us that feels fulfilled not by achievement but by generosity. The caregiver believes that life's meaning is found in service and kindness and making others feel safe. And when you think about it, this archetype is what keeps humanity alive. Without caregivers, society would collapse. But like every archetype, the caregiver carries a shadow, and this one can be heavy. The very compassion that makes the caregiver so selfless can also make them self-destructive. They give and give until there's nothing left for themselves. They become martyrs, defining their worth by how much they sacrifice. And sometimes they're taken advantage of. Others grow to expect their endless support without giving anything back. Have you ever noticed yourself doing this? Always being the reliable one, the helper, the fixer, until you're burned out and secretly resentful. That's the shadow side of the caregiver. It whispers, if you're not giving, you're not valuable. But that's a lie. One of the most important lessons for the caregiver is realizing that true compassion includes compassion for yourself. It means recognizing that you are not a bottomless well of energy, and that setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sustainable. Because here's the irony, if you destroy yourself while caring for others, you won't be able to care for anyone at all. So if you see yourself in the caregiver, remember this: your kindness is a gift, but you're allowed to keep some of it for yourself. Service doesn't mean self-erasure. In fact, the healthiest caregivers are the ones who have learned that protecting their own energy is just as important as protecting others. And it's at this point where another archetype often appears, the explorer. While the caregiver anchors themselves in relationships and responsibilities, the explorer craves freedom, discovery, and the open road ahead. If the caregiver is about safety and stability, the explorer is about breaking boundaries and stepping into the unknown. The explorer archetype lives in all of us who have ever felt restless with routine, who've stared out the window and thought, there has to be more out there. They're the travelers who hop on planes with one-way tickets, the innovators who dream of new ways of living, the artists who refuse to stay confined within society's expectations. For the explorer, life is not about comfort, it's about adventure. But the explorer's journey isn't just physical, it's deeply psychological. Jung would say the explorer reflects our drive to individuate, to become our true, authentic self, by breaking free from the roles and identities society places on us. The explorer asks the dangerous, exhilarating question, who am I really when no one is telling me what to be? And yet, this freedom comes with a cost. The shadow of the explorer is restlessness. In their quest for new horizons, they can become unable to commit to anything or anyone. They may run from relationship to relationship, job to job, city to city, always chasing a feeling of fulfillment that never quite lands. They're terrified of being trapped, so they escape at the first sign of permanence. Maybe you've known someone like this, or maybe you've been this person, always chasing the next big thing, only to feel empty once you've arrived. It's like drinking salt water. The more you consume, the thirstier you get. That's the explorer's shadow, mistaking endless movement for true discovery. But here's the paradox. The explorer's greatest discoveries often come not from running but from stopping. From realizing that the unknown they've been chasing out there has been within them all along. The true exploration isn't always geographical. It's psychological, spiritual, emotional. When the explorer finally turns inward, that's when the real journey begins. And here's where it gets fascinating. The caregiver and the explorer, though seemingly opposite, are often deeply connected. Caregivers may dream of escaping into freedom, because their responsibilities weigh so heavily. Explorers may find themselves unexpectedly called to care for someone, which forces them to slow down and face parts of themselves they were trying to outrun. In stories, this pairing often appears, the wandering adventurer who discovers their heart when they have to protect someone else, or the devoted caregiver who finally realizes they must step away and explore their own path. These archetypes remind us that we're not meant to live in extremes. Too much caregiving, and we lose ourselves. Too much exploring, and we lose connection. But when we learn to balance them, we find something beautiful. The caregiver teaches us to love. The explorer teaches us to live, and together they bring us closer to wholeness. So, think about your own life. Do you feel like you've been giving endlessly, forgetting yourself in the process? That's your inner caregiver calling for balance. Or do you feel restless, always chasing the next adventure but never quite finding peace? That's your explorer archetype asking to be grounded. Neither is wrong, but both have lessons you may be ready to learn. And just like that, you can see how these archetypes don't just describe us, they challenge us, they push us toward growth, they ask us to confront our shadows, to balance our extremes and to move closer to our true, integrated self. But of course the journey doesn't stop here, because while the hero fights, the caregiver nurtures, and the explorer seeks, there's another archetype waiting in the shadows. One that refuses to play by the rules, one that thrives on disruption, rebellion, and shaking the system to its core. And that's where things start to get really interesting. The explorer taught us about freedom, about the thrill of venturing into the unknown. But if the explorer's gift is discovery, there's another archetype whose gift is disruption, where the explorer pushes boundaries to see what lies beyond. The rebel pushes boundaries because the boundaries themselves are unjust, unfair, or simply suffocating. The rebel archetype lives in the cracks of every society, every age, and every human heart. It is the force that whispers, things don't have to be this way. You can see it in great historical figures, people like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, or Mahatma Gandhi, who stood up to systems far bigger than themselves. But you can also see it in the quiet defiance of a teenager who refuses to conform, and the artist who paints outside the lines, and the entrepreneur who refuses to play by outdated rules. The rebel doesn't just explore new territory. It demands new territory. It tears down what no longer serves, so something better can rise in its place. Jung would say the rebel archetype reflects the human drive for transformation. It is the chaos that births renewal. But of course the rebel's power comes with a shadow. Rebellion without purpose becomes destruction for its own sake. The rebel can burn bridges recklessly, fight battles that don't matter, or live in a state of constant resistance, never building anything new because they're too busy tearing down the old. It's the archetype of the anarchist who just wants to watch the world burn, or the person who leaves a trail of broken relationships, jobs, and promises behind them in the name of freedom. Have you ever felt that restless energy inside you? The urge to walk away from something safe but suffocating, to quit, to break free, even if you're not entirely sure what comes after? That's the rebel calling, and sometimes that call is necessary. Revolutions, whether in society or in your personal life, are rarely comfortable. Sometimes the only way to grow is to let something burn. But the true power of the rebel comes when rebellion is paired with vision, when the destruction is not mindless but purposeful, when you're not just running from something but running toward something. That's when the rebel becomes not just a disruptor but a creator. And this is where things get interesting, because the rebel often dances with another archetype, the lover. On the surface, they might seem like opposites. The rebel wants to break rules. The lover wants to connect. The rebel is fueled by anger at what's wrong. The lover is fueled by passion for what's beautiful. And yet they often exist side by side, because what do most rebels ultimately fight for? Love. Love of freedom. Love of truth. Love of people who deserve better. The lover archetype is perhaps the most human of them all, because at the core of every human being is the longing to connect, to belong, to merge with something or someone beyond ourselves. The lover is not only about romance, though romance is a powerful part of it. The lover shows up in art, in beauty, in the way we pour ourselves into music, poetry, friendship, and intimacy. The lover archetype lives in every moment where you feel swept away by passion, where the ordinary becomes sacred simply because of the depth of feeling attached to it. Think of the artist who pours their soul into a canvas, not for money but because they are in love with the act of creation. Think of the person who sees the world not as cold and mechanical, but as alive and filled with meaning, where a sunset isn't just light in the sky, but a message, a gift. That's the lover speaking. But like every archetype, the lover has a shadow, and this one can be just as dangerous as the rebels. In its shadow, the lover becomes consumed by attachment. They lose themselves in relationships, in passion, in desire. They become dependent, jealous, and fragile, defining their worth only through the eyes of another. It's the archetype of the person who can't stand being alone, who would rather stay in a toxic relationship than face themselves, or the artist who becomes addicted to the highs of inspiration and falls into despair when the passion fades. And yet, when the lover is balanced, it is one of the most transformative forces in the human psyche, because love in its truest form is not about losing yourself in another, but about finding yourself reflected in another. It's not about dependency, but about connection. Now notice the tension here. The rebel and the lover seem to pull in opposite directions, yet together they reveal something profound. The rebel asks, what must be destroyed? The lover asks, what must be preserved? The rebel says, tear down the prison walls. The lover says, tear them down because what's inside is worth protecting. Think of history's greatest rebels. They weren't fighting only out of anger. They were fueled by love. Love for justice. Love for people. Love for freedom. Even in your own life, maybe you felt this combination. You broke free from a toxic job or relationship, not just because you hated it, but because you loved yourself too much to stay. That's the rebel and the lover, working hand in hand. But here's the trap. Sometimes the rebel rejects love out of fear. It will soften them, while the lover rejects rebellion out of fear. It will cause loss. The key is integration, to let the rebel's fire burn with purpose, guided by the lover's compassion, to let the lover's passion thrive, protected by the rebel's courage to fight for it. And this is the deeper truth Jung pointed toward. Archetypes are not cages. They are mirrors. You may recognize yourself strongly in one, but the reality is all of these archetypes live inside you. They rise and fall depending on the season of your life, the challenges you face, and the lessons you're ready to learn. Some of us lean into the hero, others into the caregiver, some into the explorer or rebel or lover, but all of us at some point will walk through each of them. So take a moment to reflect. Do you feel the rebel's fire burning in you right now? The urge to break free, to tear down, to start over? Or do you feel the rebel's pull, that deep longing for connection, beauty, intimacy, and passion? Maybe you feel both at once. Maybe you're breaking away from something old, because of a love so powerful that it refuses to let you stay stuck. And just like that, you can see how Jung's archetypes are not abstract ideas, but living forces that shape your story. They're not just in myths and legends. They're in your choices, your relationships, your struggles, your triumphs. They are the hidden scripts you've been following all along. But the journey doesn't end here, because while the rebel teaches you to break free and the lover teaches you to connect, there are still deeper truths waiting to be uncovered. Archetypes that reveal not just how you fight or how you love, but how you see, how you think, how you believe. And as we move forward, we'll step into the mind of the sage, the archetype of wisdom and the innocent, the archetype of purity and hope. Together they hold a key to something we all long for, meaning. The rebel showed us what it means to fight, to resist, to tear down. The lover revealed the depths of passion, the beauty of connection, and the risks of losing ourselves in longing. But what happens after the storm, after the battles and the heartbreak, after the victories and the defeats? There comes a point in every life when the hunger for adventure, for rebellion, for even love itself is met with a quieter, deeper question. What is the truth? This is where the sage enters. The sage archetype is the seeker of knowledge, the bearer of wisdom, the one who looks at life not through the lens of conquest or romance, but through clarity. Think of the wise elder in myths and stories. Gandalf, Yoda, Dumbledore. These characters don't fight the battles directly. They guide the heroes with insight, with truths that are often uncomfortable but necessary. The sage archetype isn't flashy. It doesn't crave attention. Its power lies in perspective. In real life, the sage appears in teachers who challenge you to think differently, in philosophers who wrestle with life's deepest questions, in mentors who see patterns you're blind to. And the truth is, the sage also lives within you. In those moments when you step back from your life and suddenly see the bigger picture, when you ask, what does this mean? What lesson is here? What truth have I been avoiding? But of course, wisdom comes with its own shadow. The sage can fall into overthinking, becoming paralyzed by analysis. They can retreat so far into their mind that they detach from life itself. They can cling to knowledge as a shield, using it to feel superior or safe, instead of allowing it to transform them. Have you ever caught yourself reading endless self-help books, gathering advice, making plans but never actually acting on any of it. That's the sage in its shadow, knowledge without embodiment. The lesson of the sage is that wisdom is not just what you know but what you live. The point isn't to escape into your head but to use what you've learned to illuminate the path forward for yourself and for others. And then beyond the sage, there is one final archetype, perhaps the most misunderstood, and in many ways the most necessary. The innocent? At first glance the innocent may seem simple, even naive. It is the child, the dreamer, the one who sees the world through eyes unclouded by cynicism. It's Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, who believes in home. It's Forrest Gump, who in his purity of heart touches lives more deeply than he realizes. The innocent archetype is the voice inside of you that still believes the world can be good, that beauty is real, that life despite all its suffering still holds wonder. In modern life this archetype often gets dismissed. We live in a world that prizes knowledge, sophistication, strategy. Innocence feels impractical, even foolish. And yet Jung recognized its power, because while the sage offers truth, the innocent offers faith, and without faith, without hope, we cannot survive. But like all archetypes, the innocent has a shadow. In its shadow, innocence becomes denial. It becomes the refusal to see reality, the tendency to avoid pain by pretending everything is fine. It's the person who clings to toxic positivity, who refuses to confront the hard truths of life, who runs from complexity in favor of comforting illusions. The challenge for the innocent is to hold on to faith without falling into fantasy, to see the world's brokenness clearly, and still choose to believe in its beauty, to acknowledge suffering, and still carry hope. And this is where the sage and the innocent, though opposites, find their harmony. The sage sees with clarity, the innocent sees with purity. The sage may know too much and grow weary. The innocent reminds them to wonder. The innocent may dream too freely and lose their grounding. The sage reminds them to discern. Together they balance truth and hope. Together they teach us that wisdom without joy is hollow, and joy without wisdom is fleeting. Think about your own life for a moment. Have you leaned too heavily on the sage, overthinking, analyzing, forgetting how to simply live? Or have you leaned too much on the innocent, avoiding reality, refusing to see what needs to be faced? Both live within you and both are calling for balance. And maybe that's the deeper point of all these archetypes. They're not labels to box yourself into. They're mirrors to help you see the parts of yourself you've neglected, the strengths you've forgotten, the shadows you've denied. They remind you that you are not just one thing. You are many. You are hero and caregiver, explorer and rebel, lover and sage, innocent too. You are a constellation of all of them, shifting and evolving as life calls different parts of you forward. Carl Jung believed that the journey of life, the journey to your true self, is not about becoming just one archetype, but about integrating them all. To honor your courage without arrogance, to give without self-erasure, to explore without running away, to rebel with purpose, to love without losing yourself, to seek wisdom without hiding in it, to believe in goodness without denying reality. And maybe if you listen closely, you'll hear these archetypes speaking in your life right now, in the battles you're fighting, in the people you care for, in the freedoms you crave, in the rules you're questioning, in the loves you cherish, in the truths you're seeking, in the faith you're trying to hold on to. They are not just ancient symbols, they are the living threads of your human story. So the question is not, which archetype am I? The question is, which archetype is asking to be lived through me today? Because your life in many ways is the myth you are writing, and these archetypes are the characters waiting for their chapter. So what role are you ready to step into now?